Can Hollywood movies accurately portray the resurrection of Jesus? People are abandoning movie theaters for streaming, but should Christians care? Also, can we learn anything of value from the crazy Kate Middleton saga? We talk about all this and more on this episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 3 of the Faith and Pop Culture podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined by my co-host, the vomit to my seasickness, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Well, I feel less good about myself now that you've called me vomit. But
Well, you see, vomit's not good, but it does make you feel better. So
that's true.
if I'm seasickness, then you make me feel better.
Although if you're still on the boat, I will say that that'll just return, that seasickness.
And you will once again have the opportunity to bless me with your vomitness miss.
Like all good analogies or illustrations,
metaphors, they're great, but maybe don't try and
to a
stretch
point.
Too far. But something else that is great, and we hope is not stretching too far, is this podcast. So we've been having fun. Yeah. We're 3 episodes in. We feel like maybe we've shaken off some of the rust. We've got into our into a rhythm,
our groove,
into our groove, and it has been fun. There's always stuff going on in culture. And it's just been fun to look at it as through the lens as being Christians, through what Scripture says, and just looking at, how do we respond to this? How do we engage with this? How do we talk about this? Get angry if the need arises for that. But this is a particularly special week for us, especially as Christians, not just because this is opening week for Major League Baseball. The San Francisco Giants have a chance to improve on last season. But even more important than that, this is Holy Week. This is Easter Sunday is quickly approaching, which is obviously this is the biggie. Like, this is, as Christians, like, this is our day, or at least it should be, kind of the highlight on our calendars. So I thought we could kind of get into that a little bit, because I think Easter is like a historical moment and like a cultural celebration, a sacred religious holiday that does bleed into pop culture. And I think both ways of it influencing kind of the culture, and also just sort of, I think the way that we, some of the pop culture, maybe even influencing the way that we engage and
understand
culture. But kind of thoughts, are you excited for the Easter Bunny and all that stuff?
Oh yeah, well, naturally, just whatever commercialization has happened to sacred holidays, I'm here for that. Yeah, that's good, resurrection, all that. That's nice, but what's the Easter Bunny going to bring me? Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting that it is, it's sort of the foundation to which all of Christendom is based. And I do think it oddly gets a lot less lead up, I think, at least in like Protestant circles, than something like Christmas, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah,
and we'll dive into that a little bit.
I think we can even just get into that now. Like, I think there's multiple reasons for that. That a Christmas seems to be this big. It's like a season. It's not just like a day. It's like you're December 1st, or some of you monsters that do it before Thanksgiving. Like like you're already leading into
that's another podcast
into the season, where Easter does seem like it kind of it's like the week before, and the church is like, don't forget our good Good Friday service. Like, oh yeah, Easter's coming up. Like, it does seem like it doesn't have the same level of, like, not fanfare, because that's sort of the wrong word,
preparation,
but
like, maybe I think it's,
and just like importance. Like, this is like people that that really give it the honor and, like, the focus that maybe it deserves. And I do think part of that is because of culture and pop culture. Like, I think there's so many cultural elements around something like Christmas. Like, there's seasonal songs, like the carols of the season, and there's nativity plays, and there's so many different, like, kind of cultural traditions, like, I mean, religious and even secular, but around that holiday.
Yeah.
That sort of, just reminders of things like that keeps it in front of us the whole time. Where Easter, obviously we have the Easter Bunny, and you have like kind of the secular side, like the egg hunt, and like, usually you do have maybe like a passion play at church or something. There are things, but it doesn't seem like there is as much of, like, just sort of the cultural traditions around Easter the same way there is for Christmas.
Yeah, I have a few ideas, but why do you think that is? Like, how come Christmas has gotten such a great sort of PR campaign around it, I guess. I don't know. That's maybe too
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think
materialistically minded, but like, yeah, why do you think Christmas has we've established all these traditions around Christmas? There's like, the season of Advent, you have Advent calendars, you do the Advent I mean, there's so many sacred, you could even say, traditions around Christmas, not just, opening of presents and all that, but that there's just so much more of a season, like the Christmas season. There isn't really an Easter season. It's just sort of a day on the calendar, maybe 2 days, like Good Friday and Easter. Um, like what would you say are some of the reasons for that? Like,
yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think some of it is, like we don't have a Charles Dickens A Christmas Carol, an Easter Carol. Like we
yeah,
don't. There are some things that have established that, but I also just think that the holiday itself is just a different kind of story. Like there's something cozy about Christmas and
yeah,
a baby born in a manger surrounded by animals and like the heavens open and like obviously Easter, as I think we'll get into, like is like the big monumental uplifting, like
yeah,
victorious moment, but like the story of like our Savior, being executed on a cross and dying for our sin, like that doesn't have the same like easily accessible, like I feel like Easter's a more demanding
yeah,
story, like a more demanding like whatever, like money or like holiday than Christmas, where it's like Jesus came because he loved us and he wanted to reach out, and like this is more like and the reason he did that is because you're all sinners and you're
yeah.
gonna go to hell and you need someone to rescue you, and it cost him a lot, and like there's this.
I think Christmas is less offensive than Easter because you don't really have to do anything with the story of Christmas necessarily, but I think you do, like, you're sort of confronted with the problem of humanity with Easter, and I think that, to me at least, it seems why there's way more pomp and circumstance around Christmas, and like secularism can kind of get behind it, and sure, okay, fine, yeah, there's Savior in a manger, that's nice, but there's pretty lights, there's wreaths and decor and all this kind of stuff, and you can kind of have it both ways. Whereas I think with Easter, it's like, no, this is like the reason we had Christmas was for, the brutal crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection of our Savior. And you have to do something about that. Like, it doesn't leave you to be like, oh, well, that's a nice holiday for you. Like, I think that is sort of the rub with Easter, is that it demands a response, I think, whereas Christmas doesn't necessarily,
Yeah,
at least in the holiday sense
but
of
I
it.
think even like you said, I think part of it too is that, and I think influenced by movies and culture, is that I feel like we've lost sight. I mean, that's a very general, we've all like, I feel like, but sort of this culturally, or as the church, or just personally, like lost sight of really what Easter's about. But I feel like we talk about Easter, but we usually talk about the crucifixion, like
Yeah,
which I mean, that's very much an essential part of the Easter story. But like the Easter story is about the resurrection. Like it's about overcoming,
yeah,
rather than sort of focusing just on, the more like serious, somber, like like you need that part of it,
yeah,
or else the resurrection doesn't make sense. But because like I was thinking, there have been Easter, like crucifixion, passion movies through the years. Like a couple that I was of the more notable ones, like the Jesus movie back in 1979. You know, featured sort of the life of Jesus. Now, following that, the movie called The Life of Jesus, the Gospel of John, was like a word for word, like it showed the story, and then like you had like a narrator, like just sort of reading scripture. So it wasn't like acting; it was just like dramatized, putting visuals to the reading of scripture. Probably the
yeah,
most famous, Mel Gibson's The Passion, which was back in 2004, and then one of the more recent ones, Son of God, in 2014. Doesn't seem like we've had one all that recently. Like I know there's going to be like with the Chosen TV show. Eventually, that's spoiler alert, where
it's coming.
where that's heading. But even like those ones I listed off, like this week, I kind of went back just to see like for each of those, like how is the Easter story portrayed, and like they're essentially crucifixion stories. Like
Yeah,
that gets the the meat of the the drama. Like that's the third act climax, and then like the epilogue, almost like the resurrection is like the, but don't worry, things turned out good. roll credits. Like
all's well that ends well.
I mean, like the Mel Gibson's The Passion is like the most that way. Like it's I mean it's about the crucifixion,
right?
And then like it ends with about 30 seconds of you just quickly see a tomb, and then you see like Jesus like, kind of come into screen, and then like the credits come. Like very much sort of the focus on like just that aspect, like the suffering, rather than the victory, which I feel like could be a problem.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it is sort of in many ways kind of missing the whole point of Easter. And it's just interesting that and again, I feel like it maybe goes back to the fact that Easter is way more controversial than Christmas, so it's way easier to make Christmas films, and like I'm sure most people can just rattle off like how many hundreds of Christmas movies or shows have there been throughout the years, whereas like maybe there's a handful of movies about Easter, and like really none of them I don't think focus at all like post resurrection. It's just sort of like there was the resurrection as a kind of a footnote at the end, and I just think it is, but again it's because I think a lot of it is like that is the way more controversial
and I think
part of the story,
and I think it's also the more difficult to portray because like Christmas you can like obviously very supernatural and God coming to earth, like, but you can portray that without necessarily needing a lot of like it's a physical baby in a physical manger with a physical parent. Like you can portray that without having to communicate like sort of the spiritual reality. Where I feel like that's always sort of been my issue. Maybe issue is too strong. My concern with like the crucifixion type movies is that they struggle to communicate the like deeper significance of that story. Like they're very much like they focus on the physical more than like the spiritual. Like I think, and that was even my experience. Like the first time I saw Mel Gibson's The Passion is like those movies seem almost designed, almost manipulative. Maybe that's too strong, but like they almost come across like a spiritual guilt trip. And again, like doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't true and like that these are sins, but like it's like how awful can we make the physical suffering of Jesus, and like how much blood can we put on him? How much can we almost like shock value of like we're going to show you what your sin did, and like leave the theater and go repent of that sin. And like obviously that is a part of it, but like I don't think that's the main part. Like the 2 Corinthians 5:21, where it says, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Like I think what Jesus suffered on the cross is like unbearable. Like that's like excruciating. Like not to diminish that, but like you almost hear, and I think preachers do this too, like almost like you hear the way it's talked about, like, no one suffered as much as Jesus did for you. Like it was the worst possible, way that any human could suffer, which just isn't true. Like not that like it wasn't excruciating, but like he was crucified with two other people. Like the next week or the next day, a whole new batch of people were going to be put on a cross. Like,
he was killed in the most mundane of ways for that time.
Like it was essentially the guillotine of the Roman Empire. Like that was their go-to.
Way more painful than a guillotine.
Yeah, not as quick. But just the idea that like I feel like because we almost adopt like the shortcomings of the movies of like it was about how much Jesus physically suffered, that we have to just really amp that up and like let people know like this is how much we're like I think even as like a parent, like I feel like I would hope that I would go through that for my kids. Like whether I could, like, is a different question. But like, for someone I love, but like, what I can't do is take on the sins of the world and bear that. Like, I feel like what Jesus did at Easter was more than just that he physically suffered and look what your sin did. He had to get whipped for you. Like, there's more to it. But I mean, like, how do you portray that? Cinematically,
right? And I think that's the thing, and it becomes shorthand for what it maybe must have been, at least a glimpse of having separation for the only time between God the Father and God the Son. And what does that even mean? That like there was a break of fellowship in the Trinity, like the sort of, the Father turning his back on the Son. Like I don't even think we can begin to grasp like just the anguish that would be for Jesus to suffer. And so I think because we can't really even fathom that, I think the default is to just, pull the magnifying glass over the physical suffering and pain and amplify that instead, because it is something that we can sort of see and in some way relate to. Because I don't think any of us really have a frame of reference even for knowing what all took place spiritually for
and it's
for
almost
Jesus.
by amplifying the physical, we're actually diminishing what was accomplished on the cross. Like
Right.
we're not that we don't also know that there was some spiritual stuff going on, but I do think that has always been the shortcoming of these films and I mean they usually sort of like keep the resurrection as like a postscript, and like they just can't communicate very well what all was going on. They do become a very incomplete picture of Easter, of its Jesus suffered physical pain on your behalf, which is a part of it. But I think we haven't cracked the code yet on how to like. And I do think that does, especially when we're immersed in those sort of movies and stuff. I think subconsciously that also impacts the way we think of Easter as terms of Jesus's physical pain on the cross, and almost lets us off the hook of thinking about like, I think the more severe things. And maybe the only other thing to mention, and then we can move on, but just that I think it is worth noting too that, I mean, there's like we said, relatively sparse amount of like crucifixion Easter movies, but like the resurrection as like a historical event has influenced movies forever, like and theater stories and all the way like resurrection, like that theme is universal since
time
humanity. Like, like there's something about that, and we don't have time to get into like I'm a big Joseph Campbell, like hero's journey, like monomyth, universal stuff, like and he would see Jesus as just one example of many, like not the central thing that inspired the other ones, but there is something universal about like in our DNA almost, that like this resurrection story is how we understand things. Like Harry Potter or like Gandalf or like even
Obi-Wan.
more metaphorical of like Luke Skywalker dying to self. Like there's that theme is like in like almost all great stories.
And that is interesting because I do think, although we're very light on like Easter movies, it's very heavy on, let's say, Easter motifs, which is the resurrection, and it is interesting because it is the most hopeful sort of like inspiring story of all time, and yet it's just funny that it's always, at least in like the Easter movies, it's always like he did rise again and then roll credits. I just wonder, like, what do you feel like there could be a good Easter movie done that
we stop before things get really crazy,
because that's really, Easter really is sort of in many ways the beginning. I mean, it is the climax of God's story with humanity, but it's also just the very beginning of that redemption story in some ways. And so it's like there's a lot of richness there. Like after the resurrection, it just gets a lot more squirrely as far as
it's easier to fall back
cinematically on. How do you do that?
And there's this thing about a resurrection that resonates with us, like even if you're not a Christian, like you were saying, in all these stories. And it's interesting too that like they're often called the Christ figure. Like anyone that does that.
Well,
like,
most recently Dune,
like even
Paul
the people that wouldn't claim to be a follower of Jesus or believe in Jesus's claims, like we still use that terminology as
everybody knows what that means.
Like Christ is sort of like he's the ultimate like embodiment of what this means, and people almost like subconsciously attribute him that, even if they wouldn't necessarily consider themselves a believer. So Easter, again, if you're going to be watching, I know some people do kind of annually watch like Easter movies, and I think there's power, and I don't want us to like they're bad, but just be thinking about that. Like, how is this portraying? Like, is this sort of accurate to what was really going on, and what are some of maybe the limitations? But something else that's coming. I don't have a good. I don't know how you segue from the resurrection of Jesus to movies on streaming, but somehow we got to do that. So we'll just shift right over to kind of another thing that might seem like it's not as, and I don't think it is, like as directly relatable to like Christians should care about Easter and also streaming movies.
Yeah.
But I think there is something to this. So there's a study that just was been going around on the old internet that just happened, which sort of came up with sort of from their data, polling people about like, their preferences for entertainment, and concluded that 2/3 of U.S. adults would rather wait to watch movies on streaming rather than go to the movie theater. And obviously, I think like that conclusion is not like a what like people like to stream. I feel like we sort of know
No.
that it's putting a number on what we all
Yeah.
sort of know that we keep hearing like movie theaters are dying and streaming's the future, and like this seems to a bit more definitively say like people would rather watch on streaming than go to the theater. I think there's some nuance to that.
Yeah.
What does prefer mean? Like, is that all things being equal, or is that, you know, I'd like to go see it in theater, but I also would like to not pay for a babysitter.
Yeah, I don't know the details of the study and their methods for conducting the research, but I would imagine most people, uh, there is a huge like pay disparity as well. Like a movie is, I don't know, $15 to $20 per ticket, and you have to drive to someplace, and like it just, you know, set aside at least 3 hours from like when you leave your house to when you come back. Um, and it's more expensive, and streaming you probably already pay for, and you don't have to leave the house. And like myself, if you have kids, leaving the house after they go to sleep, like that's kind of not an option unless you pay for a babysitter or like arrange childcare.
Yeah, I think
So like there's way more barriers to like,
yeah, like I think what people prefer is convenience and cheap
yeah,
more than they like all things equal. Would I rather see Dune 2 in a theater or at home? Like in a theater, like it's gonna be
yeah,
better, but all things aren't equal, and
yeah,
maybe Dune I would still go, but like some other like Ghostbusters, the new Ghostbusters, like I could see that on streaming. Like I'm not,
yeah,
I'm just not worth the extra pay. But I do think that like I said, I think there is something to be said about sort of for Christians like about this the changing trends of like entertainment. Like what does that mean as we continue pretty steep down the hill of like this sort of cultural public communal activity of going to the theater, which traces back to like the actual theater
yeah,
before like cinema. Like you sit with people and you hear other people laugh at funny jokes and scream at scary parts, and like there is, even if you're like it's a relatively individual, like you're still watching on yourself and you're not talking hopefully, but like there is that communal part. Does it make a difference if we're transporting that to like our own house and we're alone and we're what like
yeah,
are we losing something as like a society and like as a people? I know there's a book, kind of a classic book from a couple decades ago called Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community by Robert D. Puntman. And that's sort of become a classic book. And that was sort of his premise of that is like, we're still doing a lot of the things that we've always done. We're just not doing them with community anymore. Like, like bowling
yeah,
alone. Like we're doing things, but we're doing it alone. Like,
right.
and as a result, we're losing some of this like social glue that ties us together. And I think as Christians, like even if you're not like a huge movie person, and like I think there is something about that we should at least be aware of.
Yeah, and I wonder too how much of it'd be interesting. What is the overlap, sort of post COVID, with this study and like maybe like church attendance, like in person church attendance? I know that's been something that a lot of churches are very concerned about and have seen like a very marked change since COVID. Is like, well, I can just stream the service at home. Maybe I'll have a friend over and we'll watch the service together at home, and I don't have to bother with all the getting dressed and like going to a place to do a thing. So I think I think it is something certainly to kind of keep your finger on and to think about, because I think in many ways the convenience as king has these sort of maybe unintended consequences to just the quality of life that we have, and it can maybe seem like, well, no, I mean, like, I have a better quality of life because I don't, I don't have to go to as many places, and especially as an introvert, it's like, well, that's great, like,
Yeah, well, I
the
think
fewer times I'm out, the
yeah, I
better.
feel like we think more about like what we gain rather than what we lose. So like,
Yeah,
it's I gain convenience. I can pause the movie, right? I can fold laundry while I watch the church service or whatever it is. And
yeah,
we don't think as much of like, but there's thing about community and like
yeah,
being a presence in your community, even as like an introvert like me that doesn't necessarily even like people all the time. And I like my time alone. Like
yeah,
there is something that gets lost. I think kind of the other thing too with sort of this shift that I think is notable is just that like when you're going to a movie, like if you're gonna go to a movie this week, you have like 10 movie options. Like there's what's
yeah,
in theaters. You're gonna see one of those movies, and
right,
like anyone else at the theater, will have seen one of those movies. And where like the more it becomes like individualistic watching at home, like there's who knows how many. There's endless amounts of TV shows. Like there's hit TV shows that I get paid to like do cultural stuff, and I've never heard of it. And it's like, oh, this is like some huge hit. Like there's this
yeah,
endless amounts of shows that like the kind of like the back in the day when there's like Star Wars is in theaters and it's literally the only thing in theaters. Like
yeah.
anyone that went to the movie saw the same movie as you and you can connect with them. Now it's like, you could spend half your time watching TV shows on Netflix and like go to work and have not watched even heard of anything that anyone else is watching. Like
Yeah, I think that is both like sort of the blessing and the curse of the internet in some ways and of streaming, because now it's like, because there's such a um variety of offerings and there's just never been more media available, whether it's TV shows, documentaries, movies, that you can I think the part of it is you can like niche down and like find your tribe that are like really into whatever the things you're into, and you can find community with those people and like geek out about whatever. The downside is there's just um, fewer cultural things that overlap with like just the normal people around you, because like I think there's always been that, like, I'm really into whatever, and people in my circles just don't get it. But now you can find your tribe online. I think that the downside is like you just you lose that whatever connection you did have to the people that are actually in your life, because like there's just fewer points of relation, if that makes sense.
yeah, and like obviously like a TV show is not the only possible. It's like,
Yeah,
if you both didn't watch Stranger Things, season 4, then like how can you even really like you can connect in a lot, sports, and there's other things that do connect, but like it is an important, like it is like
yeah,
shows and like the stories that are told and how those are those as entry points to conversations. Like I do think you lose something, and I think you see like when there are shows that do sort of pop and like a Stranger Things, like a show that lots of people all like, you sort of see some of that return of like, oh, like there's something that feels good about
yeah,
having this sort of in common and like talking about it and like, hey, did you see the latest episode, and like
right.
just sort of having that easy connection point that like people enjoy and like people.
Do you find that that's being replaced in any way? Like, do you like, so like movie theater attendance is like way down? Like, in your sort of observation of culture, do you like, is there anything rising to take its place? Do you think that would be comparable?
I don't know, because I feel like movie theater attendance is always sort of in flux. Like it's sort of going down, but it's also reports of its demise are maybe exaggerated. Like
Right.
theaters are still full. Like I do think just like streaming and stuff has sort of taken like we're still watching shows and stuff. We're just
Yeah.
doing it in a different place. I don't know as far as like physical, like because you see that even like gaming, like back when we were in youth group,
Yeah.
like to like play games with your friends, like you hook up a bunch of TVs and you go to your friend's house.
Yeah. The
But now
old
you
the
just
old LAN days
yeah,
of
now you just play with strangers online on the internet, and like it is a connection. It's just a different kind of connection, like
yeah.
and not necessarily that one's bad and one's good, but like, you are losing something. And I think as Christians, like not that we all we're called to just be immersed in like the arts and movies and be like a movie junkie, but I think we are called to like be a presence in our communities,
Yeah.
or to relate to people. And this is one area where that's becoming kind of more segmented out.
Yeah, I think like with so many other things, and maybe one last point I would make on that is it also is a stage of life thing, and so I think for me, like as someone who has two young kids, it's just movie going is not the highest priority as it was, say, like when I was in high school or college, because you could just go with your friends and like it was kind of a thing to do. But I just like there's so many other priorities for me, and so I think it also just depends on where you are in stage of life as well. I think that does have a bearing, and I mean, luckily there are options where I can, catch some of the movies just in a very different format. But you do lose some of that it is fun to watch something that's fun with other people. And so like I think there is great value there. It's also just not always convenient.
Yeah, and even if you're not connected like on the specific, like we just geek out about like Middle Earth mythology and told like,
Yeah.
but I think just having experienced the same types of stories and like what those are wrestling with and stuff like is a helpful thing for people to like. We both sort of saw this movie that dealt with these things, and we can kind of talk about that, even if we're not necessarily just like go find a geek group to like
Yeah.
get into the trivia. But something else that has not been changing or shifting is that people on the internet can be a bit crazy.
Yeah.
That's sort of been the case for a while, and every now and then we get reminded that it is indeed still true.
Yeah.
So another kind of story, and this is sort of the last thing, or just sort of a topical thing that happened this week, was the saga, the unfolding saga of Kate Middleton and everything involved in that. We don't want to get into that as like a this isn't like a gossip podcast, but
No.
hey, there were some gossip podcasts
that
and
didn't
things
keep
and
people from
videos.
gossiping though.
There were others that were gossiping. I did think we could touch on it because again, if you haven't followed the saga, if you're one of those that it wasn't just like refreshing your feed to find out where Kate Middleton was and why the royal family was hiding her from the public,
Being
and,
all cagey about it.
yeah, not like was parading her back out to meet our needs. Sort of she'd been just not present very much, like at events and things, and leading to a lot of speculation about where she was, what was wrong with her. Was it like medical? Was it some scandalous thing that happened, and some big cover up? And I mean, just people going conspiracy theories with like
Which to be fair, like at the beginning of all of this, it was like she's gonna have abdominal surgery in like January, and she'll resume duties after Easter. Like that was sort of so it was a planned thing, but that did not stop the internet.
Yeah, my needs don't depend or don't wait for the plan. And then this question is about the appearances where she was there. Was she actually in the photo, or was she photoshopped? And what's happening? And again, just people.
It was insane. Like
people didn't necessarily wait for the evidence. They forged ahead, and there's whole things about why this means that there's been like marital affairs going on, and or is she even alive anymore, and all this stuff. And all that was, or at least the questions were put to bed when she released a video just like a couple of days ago as of recording this podcast, where she shared that it's because she's dealing with some serious health stuff and had to start chemotherapy for cancer, and wanted to think through how she tells her kids, and like
needed some privacy to deal with that.
Yeah, and shocker, and didn't necessarily want to do that just in real time on the internet, and it's just been interesting to see. Like I feel like, in one sense, like anything to do with the royal family isn't necessarily the norm, because like it's kind of like the Kardashians, like that is such a heightened, like not everyone is like the royal family, and like there is an increased, like if I just drop off the map for a while, people aren't going to be like looking at photos if I'm photoshopped, like they're going to figure out me. Like there is, so it's not necessarily the norm, but I do think the response to it can tell us like it is a case study and like a portrait of like so much wrong with the internet and people's use of the internet.
Yeah, and it's so I think there has been some good that's come out of this, and one, it has been sort of the sort of putting in their place of all these like wackos that like had all these crazy theories and were just like, I think, being very careless with their accusations. And so it's like, it's that I was just thought of that Homer Simpson meme of him sort of backing into the hedges, like once they saw that, oh, it was because she had cancer, not because like her husband was cheating on her with whoever. Um, and the so that was kind of fun to just say, okay, like you morons, like just crazy people. The other fun thing about it would be the great, just very sloppy Photoshop jobs that came out of it, sort of making fun of all these people who are going crazy. And it's like, oh, it's okay. We found her. She's like at our Euro stand, and like she's just out here enjoying a great, falafel or something. And it's just like a hack job.
I mean, like a good meme does a lot of heavy lifting to
It
rename
does.
the internet. Like
That's true.
like we know the internet's bad, but like
It's
God
true.
bless memes.
That is very much true. But I think sort of the I guess more sinister side is just sort of this just like insatiable appetite for gossip and like assuming the worst, like in at every turn. And it's just like I would look on like Instagram Reels, and it would just be these randos, like, all right, where's Kate part 85? And it's like, part 85, like you're just some random person on the internet, and you're making how many videos like detailing all of these things, like get a life, like I don't know, go outside, breathe fresh air. It's like, what on earth is going on?
And I think, like, to me, as I was thinking about this, like, I feel like it's an example, like a reminder of what the internet has done, to where it's like connected people in the sense that like we don't have to wait to like for some telegram to tell us what's going on. Like we can connect with people like really in real time. Like but it's blurred this, like we've sort of lost the human. Like, we forget that these are real people. Like whether it's like a princess or king or whoever, like, or just some person that's like a blogger or just someone we know. Like we forget, because there is like, we're connected, but there's still that like veil of between where like the way people talk about other people on the internet, you wouldn't say that to their face, but
exactly,
like, because they're just a name and a profile, we sort of forget that like, oh, like the person I'm talking to is a real person, and like has real issues and like struggles, and they're not just like a profile. Like they're not. I mean, a lot of them are bots, but like the ones that aren't bots, like, and I feel like that's been like, it's why it's become so easy to like just argue and be mad at each other. Because we do it on the internet where no one's real people. Right. And this reminds us that like behind that, oh, they are real people.
Yeah, and I think it is that great reminder, and you just see the lack of generosity and the gracelessness of our society in many ways. And it's like, oh, boo-hoo, you're a princess, and you're upset because people make accusations or like are speculating about where you are. So, well, yeah, but like I don't think any of us would want to trade positions with her now. So it's like, it's just funny that people can just sort of deconstruct the humanity of those that they feel are in a much more privileged position than themselves. And I think it's so easy to do that, and it's in vogue to do that as well. Like, oh, poor you have your millions of dollars, and it's like, yeah, but your son doesn't talk to you anymore. And it's like, so it's just this, I guess, forgotten humanity of people who are greatly privileged, and with that comes a lot of like responsibilities as well. And it's like, it doesn't, just because they're in a higher like socio status than you, doesn't mean that they're like less human for some reason. And so I mean, I don't know what else there's to say about that. But
it even connects to like the thing we were just talking about with like the isolating stream. Like, I feel like the more we become digital, the more intentional we're gonna have to be to remember that, like, we're humans connecting with other humans, and it's not just sort of these virtual, avatars or whatever. But all that to say, join us next week as we launch our new Royal Family Gossip podcast to dig into all things. But one of the things that we will talk about, we don't get into a lot of royal gossip, but we do get into movies, which leads us into the next segment of this podcast, out now and coming soon.
So, Daniel, you've just finished up your review of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the latest installment of the Ghostbusters franchise. Give us a few pointers on that.
The Empire was frozen by some ghosts.
Wow, profound words, and we'll see you next time.
If you want more deep insights like that, check out the full review up on thecollision.org. It was fine. I feel like of all the reviews I've done, this is one of the ones that I was the most just like, man. Like it was a movie. There was. I didn't hate it. I didn't necessarily like it. Like I don't think it was bad. I just don't think it was. Like it was just a movie. Like I don't think. Yeah. I think there are some content stuff beyond just like ghosts and stuff. I know some Christians don't like that kind of stuff in movies. There are some like sexual jokes or like innuendos and things that are in there, like not over the top, but there are some content stuff in there. But yeah, overall, it was fine, I think.
Yeah, well, hopefully the thing that can redeem that would be Godzilla vs. Kong, which we know, speaking of Empire, the new Empire, you're going to see that this week, I think.
Yes, I'm seeing that.
High hopes.
Yes, yeah, when this podcast drops, I will have seen it.
Counting down the hours.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to this movie. I am like a monster guy. I think Godzilla -1 is like maybe my favorite. I don't know if it's the best, but like probably the movie I enjoyed the most of last year. Like,
do you think that
monster movie and there was like character and there was heart, and this movie is like
the best Godzilla. You probably say it's the best Godzilla.
Yeah,
movie?
Like it's if you haven't seen it, like again, Japanese language movie, so you have to do some reading if you don't speak Japanese. But a great movie, and like this Godzilla Kong looks like. All the reasons I love that movie is all the reasons I anticipate I'm not going to like it.
Okay, well,
a lot of spectacle, but hey,
that should be out Friday, so keep an eye out if you want to save yourself the heartache of having to pay to go see some.
And then the other thing I did see, which now we mentioned last week, we showed the interview about the Baxters, some Christian romance right up my alley.
Ooh la la.
I do have my review out for that show. I think there are Christians that will enjoy this show.
What a polite thing to say, Daniel.
I don't know if I am one of those Christians. It is one of those dilemmas of like, hey, I share for faith-based stuff. Like I want them to do well, but I feel like part of that is being honest that like not just giving it a free pass because it's one of ours. Like, yeah. I think I try to treat them, whether it's faith-based or like the most secular, humanistic. Like I try and treat those both fairly, and like, whether you're a Christian or not, like. The camera and the lighting, like all that kind of stuff, and the acting, like those are universal things that we can talk about.
That's sort of like the entry point into the game.
Yeah, and like there are things that I think need to be at a high standard. But that being said, I don't know if that's the audience this is aimed for, I don't think is necessarily going to care about the things the nitpicks I had. So I do think there are going to be, and there is something refreshing about like Christian family on TV. Like you don't see that a whole lot.
True.
But one of the things that I know is going to be refreshing, and I think I definitely will
not have said it better myself,
is what you are going to share in our next segment of things we like that you should like too.
In my quest to broaden Daniel's ever narrower musical taste, which is anything beyond heavy metal, Nordic metal, it's a very narrow, specific taste that you have, Daniel, and I know you don't like to venture outside of that, but this being the Easter season, I thought I would maybe bring to your attention and our audience's attention as well, if you haven't heard of Mahler's Symphony No. 2. That's Gustav Mahler. He was a composer of the late 19th century, I believe, born in Bohemia. But this symphony, titled Resurrection, is a symphony about, as you might surmise, the resurrection. And it's got lots of brass, huge, like epic sweeping movements throughout. There's even like a choral finish. And I think it is worth the 90-minute or so listen to listen from it from start to finish. It doesn't, I don't know if there's like one particular movement in the piece that I recommend. The end is quite good. It's just like, it's the most sort of epic kind of symphonic ending that one could have. And it is like I think it's one of the most played symphonies of symphonies that have been created. So have you had the pleasure of listening?
I don't believe I have had the pleasure of being enlightened, and could not be more excited to not check this out. I will think about.
You
I will
will be
think
doing
about this
yourself
as
a huge
as I
disfavor.
indulge into my German power metal.
Are there any German power metal Christmas or Easter?
Well, there are actually the Resurrection. Might not feature as much in Hollywood, but it's actually a pretty popular theme in metal, even from non.
I would imagine
like-
from the ashes, the phoenix rises again. Like there's a lot of metal. I mean, it's a really metal theme, Resurrection. Let's be honest. Like
Oh yeah, like it's even if you're not they're secular. Like I know like they're not European, but Camelot with a K, it's like an American power metal band. Like they have a song "Arise from the Ashes," like about Jesus and like Gethsemane. Like, there's different things that are all. Say I get my fix. You get it through classical music.
But this
I get it through.
This segment is things we like that you should too, and I just don't know that we.
I mean, the assumption is people already like the music I like because it's good. But I'm glad that you're able to enlighten them with some of that other stuff that's not.
That really paved the way for. I would imagine a lot of your metal bands draw heavily.
Oh, it is actually
from
like
the originals.
Like the classical music is the foundation of heavy metal, which is at least what I tell myself to feel a little more sophisticated as I listen to metal in my car.
Whatever helps you sleep at night, Daniel.
But one of the other things that people do like, hopefully, is this podcast. I know we have enjoyed doing this, and another fun episode getting into stuff. We hope you will join us again next week. Every Thursday, we'll be dropping new episodes. Most of all, we hope you guys will have a great and blessed Easter, and just try to just meditate about like the significance of. I know we can get lost in like the celebration or the music or just like the activity of Easter.
Yeah.
But take some time to think and kind of on the significance of this day. And also tell your friends about this podcast and leave reviews and all that kind of stuff. Help
rate and review,
all the
subscribe.
things to do. But we will see you guys next week for more conversations on faith and pop culture.